Today you will hear the electrifying testimony of Amira Al-Rahman, the billionaire heiress from Dubai, who had everything except peace. At 26 years old, she lived surrounded by luxury, but the sparkle of her jewels could not silence the emptiness screaming inside her. Behind the golden gates of her mansion, she hid a heart at war with fear, guilt, and the weight of a faith that made her feel imprisoned. Everything changes one ordinary night when a video of Charlie Kirk appears on her phone. What seemed like just another piece of online content turns into an avalanche of revelations that would shake the foundation of her family, her religion, and her entire world. Get ready. This story will challenge everything you believe about faith, courage, and freedom. And before we begin, make sure you are subscribed, leave your like, and tell us in the comments which city or country you are watching from.
I was born into a world where everything seemed perfect. My name is Amira Al-Rahman, and for as long as I can remember, luxury was the air I breathed. My father was a man of prestige in the Emirati government, respected, powerful, admired by everyone. My mother was the living image of the ideal Muslim woman, elegant, quiet, and always watchful to make sure nothing went out of line. I grew up hearing that my family's honor depended on me, on my actions, on the way I spoke, walked, and even breathed. Every gesture had to be calculated, every smile measured, every word filtered. My childhood was surrounded by gold and strictness. I remember the long white marble hallways of our house, where even the sound of my footsteps seemed like a reminder that I had to be perfect. The walls displayed framed Arabic calligraphy and verses from the Quran, and between one prayer and another, I felt a strange distance. I grew up hearing that God was watching me all the time, writing down every mistake, every distraction, every thought I was not supposed to have. That constant gaze followed me like a shadow. My father controlled everything: my schedule, my studies, my clothes, even the tone of my voice. He loved me in his own way, but his love always came with conditions. "The reputation of our family is in your hands," he would say with pride and authority, and I believed him. I believed that my duty was to live up to the image of the perfect daughter. My mother reinforced that every day. "A woman of value is one who obeys and remains silent," she repeated as she helped me put on my hijab each morning. In the mosques, I saw beauty, the golden lights reflecting on the mosaics, the soft sound of the call to prayer echoing like music. But inside me, there was a knot, a constant tightness in my chest that kept me from breathing in peace. I prayed, recited the verses, bowed on the cold carpet, but I always left with the feeling that I had not done enough. I was afraid of not being pure, afraid that God would not accept me, afraid of being punished for thoughts I could not even control. That insecurity followed me to the university, where I studied economics with almost obsessive dedication. I was the best student in the class, the most disciplined, the most reserved. Everyone said I had a brilliant future, that I would be the pride of my family. But what they didn't know was that I didn't dream of the future. I only survived the present. Every day was a performance, an act of faith and perfection. I smiled in photos, attended events, greeted dignitaries, and inside, something in me was silently screaming for help. The nights were the worst. I lay down on silk sheets, surrounded by luxury, and still felt miserable. The silence of the hallways amplified the noise in my mind. I replayed every word I had said, every thought that could have offended God. Sometimes I cried quietly, asking for forgiveness for things I didn't even understand. Fear became my most faithful companion, a fear that could not be seen, but lived in every breath, every heartbeat. Everything started to crumble when I realized that the answers they gave me no longer made sense. I loved my father, but I saw how freely he treated my brother. He could dream, question, disagree. I couldn't. My role was to wait, smile, and obey. He spoke of the future, of travel and projects. I spoke of arranged marriages and duties. The difference was overwhelming. In the religious classes, the feeling of imprisonment grew stronger. I heard women talk about submission, about how obedience was the key to faith. Every word felt like a chain tightening around my chest. I tried to agree, tried to find meaning, but something inside me rebelled. Why would God create in me such a strong desire to think, to learn, If all I was supposed to do was obey, why would he give me a mind and then ask me to silence it? Those questions became dangerous. I couldn't speak them aloud. I couldn't write them. Even thinking them made me feel guilty. The fear of being discovered consumed me. I began to withdraw emotionally from my family, my friends, even from myself. It was as if my soul was shrinking to fit inside the expectations of others. There was one day that remains etched in my memory. We were at a formal dinner with dignitaries and businessmen. I wore a simple black dress, my hijab perfectly aligned, and everyone at the table praised the daughter of Al-Rahman for her elegance. But as the compliments came, I felt like I was disappearing. It was as if everyone saw an image, a painting, and no one realized that behind it there was a woman made of flesh, blood, and a tired soul. It was around that time that I began having anxiety attacks. At night, my heart would race, my breathing would falter, and I had the strange feeling that God was punishing me. I tried to pray, but the words came out empty. I could no longer believe that he was listening. That's when I realized I didn't have a relationship with God. I had fear of him. One night, after yet another sleepless struggle, I got up and went out to the balcony. The skyline of Dubai sparkled with lights, luxury cars, and skyscrapers that seemed to touch the heavens, and even surrounded by so much grandeur, I felt small. I looked up and whispered something I had never dared to say before. If there is a God who truly loves me, please, show me who you are. My voice trembled. I didn't know if he would hear me, but that was the first moment of truth in my entire life. The following days felt strange. Something inside me began to shift. I still went to the mosque, still performed the prayers, but it didn't feel the same. It was as if that silent plea had opened a crack into something much greater than myself. Sometimes, when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw just the model daughter. I saw a woman starving for meaning. Then, on an ordinary night, something unlikely happened. I couldn't sleep. Anxiety wouldn't let me. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through YouTube. Normally, I watched videos about fashion, travel, or cooking. Light, safe things, free of risk. But that night, the algorithm showed me something different. A title appeared on the screen. Charlie Kirk, The Truth About Freedom and Faith, That Universities Don't Want You to Hear. I confess the name wasn't familiar to me, but the word freedom caught my attention. I hesitated. I knew I shouldn't watch it. Western content was seen with suspicion, but my curiosity spoke louder. I tapped on the video. In the first few minutes, I heard something that unsettled me. True freedom doesn't come from government or culture. It comes from the heart. And the heart is only free when it finds the truth. That hit me deeply. I was used to seeing God as a distant judge, not as the source of freedom. Charlie spoke firmly and confidently, but without arrogance. He quoted principles, talked about morality, about the importance of faith in God, and about how the emptiness of modern society was the result of a spirituality with no foundation. I kept watching, fascinated. With every sentence, I felt a strange unease, as if something inside me was waking up after years of silence. In the following videos, he mentioned Christian values, the idea that human beings are not born to be slaves of fear, but to live with purpose. He used a word that intrigued me deeply. Grace. I looked up its meaning. Grace. The idea of a love that cannot be bought, that cannot be earned, that simply exists. That word followed me for days. In my faith, everything was about effort. I had to prove my purity, my devotion, my worth. But there, someone was saying that the love of God cannot be achieved. It is received. I couldn't understand that. And at the same time, it was everything I had always longed to hear. In the following days, I started watching other videos, pastors, debates, testimonies, and each one seemed to answer a question I had never dared to ask. Who was this Jesus they spoke of with such passion? Why did there seem to be so much love, so much peace, when they said his name? Charlie's words echoed in my mind. Faith is not a prison. It is the path to true freedom. Those words stayed with me everywhere. In class, at work, even in the mosque. I tried to push the thoughts away, but something stronger kept pulling me back. I started researching discreetly. I remember the first time I typed, "Who is Jesus Christ?" into Google. My hands were shaking. It was dangerous. If someone found out, I could lose everything. Even so, I continued. Each video, each article, was like a window opening in a dark room. And that's when something supernatural began to happen. I didn't hear voices. I didn't see visions. But something inside me was changing. The fear that had followed me since childhood began to lose its grip. For the first time, I felt a peace I couldn't explain. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I felt seen. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I could sense that something greater was calling me. A call that didn't come from outside. It came from within. A silent, irresistible call, as if an invisible presence was whispering to me, "Keep going." And I did. Every night became a search. Every new video, a spark. I didn't know what to call it, but something told me I was closer to the truth than I had ever been in my life. It was at that moment that my life began to divide itself between before and after, between fear and hope, between guilt and grace. I still didn't fully understand what was happening, but the Holy Spirit was already moving the pieces inside me. And from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The weeks following that first contact with the word, grace, felt like a silent whirlwind inside me. I didn't tell anyone what was happening, but each night felt like diving deeper into something I couldn't explain. I still went to university, attended family gatherings, wore the same flawless abaya, fulfilled all my prayers, but inside, I was no longer the same. It was as if a seed had been planted in my heart, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more it grew. I started searching for stories of people who had experienced something similar. With my heart racing, I typed, "conversion testimony," and that's how I found a series of videos of women from the Middle East who, like me, had been raised within the same rituals, the same fears, the same golden walls. They spoke with tears in their eyes. But what struck me wasn't the pain. It was the peace on their faces. There was something different in their gaze, a serene, steady light, impossible to fake. I watched secretly, night after night, the glow of my phone reflecting on my bedroom walls. I remember one of them, a young Lebanese woman named Sarah, saying, "I discovered that God didn't want me perfect. He wanted me close." That sentence echoed inside me for days. I had never heard anything like it. I had always been told that God expected obedience, sacrifice, and discipline, never intimacy. As I watched those testimonies, I began to cry without understanding why. It was as if those stories spoke directly to me, crossing oceans, religions, and borders. Each woman said the name of Jesus with such tenderness that it felt like they knew him personally. I wondered, how is it possible to love someone you cannot see, but who changes everything inside you? One of those nights, something in me gave way. I wasn't resisting anymore. I sat on my bed, hugged my knees, and cried like never before. The words came naturally, without rehearsal, without fear, without rituals, just a bare heart. I whispered softly, "Jesus, if you are real, speak to me." There was no thunder, no lightning, no voice from heaven, only the distant sound of the city and the pounding of my heart. For a moment, I thought nothing would happen, but then, something gentle, almost imperceptible, began to fill the room. It was as if the air itself had changed. The weight I had carried in my chest for years began to dissolve, inch by inch. A subtle warmth, an invisible yet undeniable presence took over the room. I couldn't explain it, but for the first time in my entire life, I felt peace. Not that fleeting peace that comes from good news, a trip, or a compliment. It was a peace that seemed to come from somewhere else, deep, steady, alive. It was as if someone had held my heart and whispered, "You are not alone." I cried until I fell asleep, and that night, after years of insomnia, I slept deeply, without fear, without guilt, without the feeling of being judged. When I woke up, the Dubai sun was streaming through the curtains, painting the room in gold. Everything looked the same, the furniture, the mirror, the clothes, but I knew something invisible had changed. It wasn't a passing emotion. It was as if my soul had finally found air to breathe. In the following days, I began to pray differently. I didn't recite formulas or worry about posture. I just talked. I spoke to Jesus as one speaks to a trusted friend. I told him about my anxiety, my fears, my doubts, and with every word, I felt that same gentle presence surrounding me. But the human heart is curious. When it finds the light, it also begins to see the shadows more clearly. I knew that what I was living was dangerous. Dubai is a modern city, but not all subjects are allowed, and the Christian faith was not something I could share freely. Even so, something inside me told me I could never go back. I wanted to know more. I wanted to understand who this God was who didn't demand perfection from me, but offered love instead. That's when my life began to split in two. By day, I was the same Amira, the exemplary Muslim woman, disciplined, following every tradition with precision. At night, I was another version of myself, curious, passionate about learning more about Jesus, connected to the unseen. I downloaded a VPN to access Christian websites blocked in the region. I created a fake profile with another name and a generic photo so no one could trace my searches. At first, my hands trembled every time I typed something. The fear was real, but the hunger for truth was even stronger. I started studying the Bible online, using apps that disguised the content. I read in secret, late into the night, with my earphones on low and my heart racing. Each verse seemed to speak directly to me. When I read the words, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest," I cried again. It was as if he was answering that first prayer I had made while looking at the sky. But living two parallel lives is like walking a tightrope over an abyss. One small slip, and everything collapses, and that's exactly what happened. One day, on my way back from the university, I passed by a small booth inside one of Dubai's malls. A Filipino woman was selling necklaces and bracelets. She greeted me with a kind smile. As I looked over the pieces, my eyes stopped on a simple necklace. A thin chain with a small golden cross. I can't explain what I felt at that moment. It was as if that cross was calling me. It wasn't the gold that drew me, but what it represented. The freedom I had felt during that prayer. With my heart racing, I bought it. The woman looked into my eyes and said softly, "God bless you." I froze. She noticed my discomfort and said nothing else. I carefully tucked the necklace away, hiding it under my blouse. It was my secret, the symbol of something new being born within me. For weeks, I wore that necklace in secret. It was small enough to go unnoticed, but large enough to remind me that even in silence, I already belonged to another path. I touched it in moments of fear, during the mechanical prayers, and it gave me strength. But what I feared happened. One Friday afternoon, as I was getting ready for dinner with my family, the necklace slipped from the collar of my dress and glimmered for just a second under the light. That brief moment was enough for my brother to see it. He frowned, confused, but said nothing. I saw his look, and my entire body froze. I pretended to adjust my clothes, trying to act normal. But inside, panic had already begun. That night, he was different. Quiet. Observant. The days that followed were torment. He started asking subtle questions. "You've been different, Amira. Are you hiding something?" I denied it, smiling, but I knew the walls were closing in. 2 weeks later, the confrontation happened. I was in the kitchen helping my mother when I heard firm footsteps in the hallway. My father entered, accompanied by my brother and my uncle, the same uncle who was respected as a religious scholar in our community. The air grew heavy. My heart began to beat so fast I could hear the sound in my chest. My father placed his phone on the table. On the screen were records of my search history. I had forgotten to erase some tabs before syncing the device with the home Wi-Fi. There they were, the titles: Who is Jesus Christ? What does grace mean? Conversion testimonies. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. My father looked at me as if he didn't recognize me. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. My uncle, in a calm voice, asked, "What is this, my daughter?" I wanted to answer, but no sound came out. The fear was so intense that my hands shook. Finally, I managed to say, "I just wanted to understand." That sentence echoed through the room like an insult. My father slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "Understand what? You have everything. Why look for something outside the truth we raised you to follow? Tears began to fall. My mother came closer and whispered, "Say it was a mistake. Say it was just curiosity." But I couldn't lie. I could no longer deny what had happened inside me. I tried to explain what I felt, that it wasn't rebellion, that it wasn't disrespect, that I had simply felt peace for the first time in years. I spoke about love, about grace, about inner freedom. But the more I spoke, the more horrified they became. My uncle quoted verses, spoke of punishment, and said that what I was feeling was a dangerous illusion. My father looked at me with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "You are shaming us," he said. "You are destroying the honor of our family." I tried to hold his hand, but he pulled away. My mother's tears fell to the floor as she kept repeating, "You need to repent. There's still time." That night felt endless. We all went to the main hall, where the conversation turned into an interrogation. I cried, begged them to listen to me, but it was useless. They were not seeing a daughter. They were seeing a threat. In the days that followed, the pressure increased. I was constantly watched, my phone confiscated, my computer locked. My visits to the university were suspended. They tried to convince me, with words and tears, to renounce what they called my spiritual deviation. But inside me, the decision was already made. I knew what I had felt. I knew what I had experienced. The peace that filled my heart that night was not an illusion. It was too real to be denied. And that's when I realized the true miracle wasn't something I saw. It was something that happened inside me. A love that doesn't demand proof, a presence that never abandons, a strength that remains even when everything around you collapses. I didn't yet know how I would face what was coming next. But one thing I knew with absolute certainty: I could never go back. Because denying what God had done would be like denying the very air I breathed. And with that silent but unshakable conviction, I began to prepare for the storm that was about to fall upon me. 3 days after that confrontation, my life stopped belonging to me. Everything happened so fast that for a few moments, I thought I was living a nightmare. My father called me into his office, and for the first time, there was no anger in his voice, only an icy coldness. On the desk were documents, my passport, and a small suitcase with a few clothes. "You are no longer part of this family," he said. The words fell on me like blades. I wanted to speak, to explain, to beg. But he raised his hand and simply concluded, "From now on, you are on your own. May the God you chose take care of you." At that moment, something inside me broke, and at the same time, something new was born. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. My mother cried silently, unable to look at me. My brother stood with his arms crossed, as if trying to convince himself that this was the right thing to do. I walked out the door and heard the harsh sound of the key turning behind me. That was when I realized I had truly lost everything. The accounts were frozen, my phone number canceled, my university access suspended. Even the driver who used to take me to class was told to ignore me. Within a few hours, I went from being the admired heiress to becoming a nameless shadow. The Dubai sun burned like fire as I stepped out of my family's property for the last time. But in the distance, the sky began to darken. The wind rose, and within minutes, a sandstorm swept through the streets. I walked aimlessly, my face covered with a scarf, and every grain of sand that hit my skin felt like a reminder of the pain burning inside me. Suddenly, in the middle of that fury of nature, something impossible to describe happened. I felt a presence, not a vague sensation, but something real, near, almost tangible, as if someone were walking beside me, even though my eyes saw no one. The sound of the wind mixed with a gentle voice deep in my soul. "I am with you." Those words echoed like an embrace. There was no more doubt, no more fear. The storm didn't stop, but inside me, a sacred silence took over. For the first time, I wasn't the one walking alone, and even without knowing what was ahead, I knew I was being guided. With the little money I still had hidden in a small pouch, I bought a last-minute ticket. I didn't think twice. I chose an almost random destination, far enough to disappear, Amman, in Jordan. That night, I boarded a plane with no goodbyes, no plans, No guarantees of anything. As the plane lifted off, I looked out the window and saw the lights of Dubai fading into the horizon. They were no longer the lights of my city. They were the reflection of the life I was leaving behind. I arrived in Amman at dawn. The cold desert air stung my face, and uncertainty weighed on my shoulders. I knew no one, had no home, and carried only a suitcase, a necklace with a cross, and a faith still learning to walk. But it was there, at that lowest point, that the impossible began. A taxi driver, noticing my accent, asked where I was from. I hesitated, and before I could come up with an answer, he simply said, "You look tired. There's a shelter nearby. They help women who are alone." Without fully understanding, I accepted the ride. That's how, without planning it, I arrived at a small house on the outskirts of the city. The door was simple, made of worn wood, and a discreet sign read only, "Welcome, sister." When I entered, I was greeted by a woman with a serene gaze and hands marked by time. She introduced herself as Lena, a Lebanese Christian who coordinated a secret support group for former Muslims who had found faith in Jesus. I could barely speak. The tears came before the words. She hugged me, and in that embrace, I felt something I had never experienced before. Acceptance without condition, love without demand. In the days that followed, I began to understand what it meant to live without masks. The house was simple, with white walls and the smell of fresh coffee. There, I met other women with stories similar to mine, each carrying invisible scars, yet with eyes that shone with the same hope. It was there that I found the community that would become my new family. The mornings were quiet, devoted to reading the Bible. At first, I felt insecure. The words were new, the concepts challenging. But the more I read, the more everything made sense. The passages about forgiveness and grace seemed written especially for me. One day, while reading the Gospel of John, I came across the verse that said, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." I closed the book and cried, because now I understood. The truth was not an idea. It was a person. A few weeks later, I decided to be baptized. The moment was simple but unforgettable. We went to a small stream on the outskirts of Amman at sunrise. The air was cold, and the wind whispered between the stones. When I stepped into the water, I felt once again that same peace from the first night in Dubai. It was as if Jesus was saying to me, "Now you are my daughter." Tears mixed with the water, and when I came out, I felt that the weight of the past had finally dissolved. I then began working with what I knew best, digital marketing. Lena helped me find a remote job at a small agency, and it was through that work that God began to show me a new purpose. I spent hours on social media, analyzing trends, writing posts, observing people's behavior online. And amid all that, I realized something. There were thousands of women just like me, searching for answers in silence, afraid of being seen, their hearts crying out for freedom. One night, praying alone in my room, I felt something powerful inside me. It was like a clear whisper, "Use what I have given you." I picked up my phone and started writing. I created a new Instagram account. No name, no face. I chose the pseudonym Desert Light. My goal was simple: to share small messages of hope, disguised as poetry and reflections, so that Arab women could read them without raising suspicion. I started posting short verses like, "There is a love that cannot be bought, a peace that cannot be sold, and a light that shines even when the world tries to hide it." In the comments, discreet messages began to appear. "You speak of something I feel but cannot explain." And others, more direct, "Are you talking about Jesus?" My heart raced with every new notification. Within weeks, the page gained hundreds of followers, then thousands. Every message I received was a reminder that what seemed like the end of my life in Dubai was, in truth, the beginning of the purpose God had for me. A woman from Syria wrote, "I watched the same videos you did. I thought I was alone." Another from Egypt said, "You describe exactly what I feel when I pray in secret." And there, hidden behind a screen, I became a bridge between hearts longing for the truth. What had begun with a single click on a video by Charlie Kirk, back in a lonely night in Dubai, was now turning into a quiet movement of faith and hope. It was impossible not to see the hand of God in every detail. While replying to messages, I remembered the words I heard in the storm. I am with you. And now I understood. He had never left my side. Over time, the profile Desert Light surpassed 5,000 followers. Each post was written carefully, every phrase coded with love and wisdom. I couldn't use the name of Jesus directly, but he was in every line. Sometimes I received anonymous threats, warnings that someone had tried to trace the account. Even so, I didn't stop, because now I knew that my freedom had a price, but it also had a purpose. In every message replied to, in every silent prayer, I felt that my story was being used to light the way for others, and in some mysterious way, the same God who led me out of the sandstorm was now allowing me to sow hope in hearts scattered across deserts, far greater than mine. I no longer had wealth, or title, or a prestigious name, but I had something infinitely more valuable, a calling. And that calling echoed inside me every morning when I opened my eyes and remembered that somehow the heiress from Dubai had become a messenger of faith in the middle of the digital desert, and even without understanding everything that was yet to come, I knew. True freedom always has a price, but no prison is strong enough to contain the power of someone who has truly been set free.
And if you've made it this far, maybe what happened to Amira spoke to something deep inside of you. If this story touched your heart, leave your like and make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because here, every testimony is a new reminder that God still performs miracles. And for you who stayed until the end, write in the comments, I love Jesus. That way I'll know this message found the right place, your heart. Now get ready, because the next video is already on the screen. In Qatar, he was kneeling, ready to die for his faith. And then God did the impossible. You need to hear what happened.